Hey guys, I'm Drago, and do you hear that? That sound in the distance? What is that? The Toothless dancer meme has got to be one of the best memes to ever happen. Look at him, he's just vibing, he's amazing, he's adorable, and I love him. I love him so much that I decided today it might be fun to try and make some art of it. And rather than just drawing this cartoon version that'll take me, I don't know, half an hour to an hour to make, I thought why not step it up a notch and make it a bit more realistic. Put that RTX on, if you know what I'm saying. And so here we are with today's video. The Toothless dancer meme, but realistic. This was the pain to do and turned out absolutely awful, but hey, maybe it's okay, maybe you guys will like it, I don't know, I don't like it. Why is my voice getting so high? Anyways guys, I hope you enjoy. Oh wait, first things first was get some construction lines in there. Yeah, I know, it's a really simple character. I could have just gone straight into a sketch, but I really wanted to make sure this was looking okay and correct. Especially because I was mixing a sort of more cartoon silly style with a realistic style. So while I wanted to keep the general character design of the cartoon one, it needed to be a bit more anatomically correct, have a few more features that the actual Toothless has in the movie, stuff like that. So I started to make construction lines to make sure that good shape is there, that basic general shape that I need is there. Luckily though, with him being really basic, it just meant I could use a lot of basic shapes, mostly circles and ovals and stuff like that. I kept it mostly the same, but I did add his wings, and I did make it so the sort of body shape was a bit more of a 3D look. So rather than the flat 2D-ness that the cartoon is, as you can see, like the legs are just like on a flat plane, which I'm not hating at, by the way, that's just the cartoon design. But for this, with the style that I'm going for, I need to make sure that the shapes look a lot more 3D. So yeah, I made sure that things like weren't just on the same plane. But a lot of the 3D-ness was going to come from colouring and shading and stuff. I also just made sure that the shape of some things were more accurate to the movie version. So like the arms and legs, the shape of his feet, adding claws. I also made sure to add the extra set of fins that he's got on the base of his tail. The original cartoon one doesn't have that. I almost forgot to add it, but I thought if I want this to be realistic, I need to add those. So he got those as well as his wings back. For the background though, I wanted to keep it the same scene, so I heavily referenced the cartoon screenshot here. Basically, I was going to have it the same environment, the same location, but just make it more realistic, just paint it in a more realistic way, rather than the cartoon style. This isn't me hating the cartoon style, seriously, I actually really like the style that this was made in. The background actually looks really gorgeous in this, like for them to get a background that detailed, but still in a cartoon style, it's really well done. I don't know how they did it, but it's amazing. But yeah, obviously I was going for a different style, so if you've watched my videos before, you're probably thinking, oh, she's going to go in and do some line art now. Nope. And the reason is because this is a realistic piece, and real life doesn't have outlines. Things don't have a black outline to them like a cartoon. And while lineless is a style that I am honestly not that comfortable with doing, I don't do it often, I knew it's probably going to be the best way to approach this one. So rather than freehanding it, I decided to make use of size line work layers. This way I can make lines that I could sort of automatically curve and get exactly right by adjusting the points of them. Right now, crossing over instead doesn't really matter because this is all just going to be a flat base colour. As long as the general shape is there, it's fine. The actual idea of getting in the details of design will be in the colouring. So the way I was approaching it is that every single part that was a different colour was its own layer. So we had the base of the body, which was obviously its own layer. We had the claws as its own layer. We had the wings as its own layer. The eyes were their own layers, stuff like that. Every colour, every different shade I had as a new layer. That way I could separate it easily and I could work on painting one layer without affecting another part. Using layers is very helpful. I would suggest doing it as much as you can. But sometimes it is fun to go in and do things on one layer if you really want the absolute traditional painting experience. But considering this is something I'm not that comfortable with, I was definitely making it as easy on myself as I possibly could. With the base of Toothless in and having even added some of the more prominent scales that Toothless has on him, I went on to looking at the background. Now, fun fact about me, I absolutely suck at backgrounds. I don't know why, but they're just my weakest point. I don't know why I struggle so much with them. Very particular types of backgrounds I can do, like a more abstract background is fine. A pattern background, an abstract background, a background that's like, I don't know, outer space or something I can do. A bit like in this piece I did with the movie Spring Bonnie. That sort of background is fine for me. But a background that is more like a scene, an actual realistic sort of location. So be it out in a forest or any other landscape or within a building or industrial or urban, that's where I start to really struggle. Definitely better at urban landscapes than I am natural landscapes, because with urban landscapes you can be a bit more sort of rigid and methodical, and there's a lot of sort of harsh and straighter lines. I mean, buildings are straight and stuff. But with nature, there's a lot more flow to it. Things are a lot more random, you know, there's a lot of random leaves, lots of small little details around. You know, nature isn't this industrial, thought out thing. It is this force that has grown and it has quirks and stuff to it. It's never the same. And all the textures and stuff, I just find it so difficult to do. So I just sort of started by flat colouring each part, again, using different layers for every part. But I was absolutely dreading actually making this background, like, oh god. With the base of the background in, it was time to start shading Toothless. This was the very base shading where I just started to determine shapes and separate things from each other. So like his, what even are they? Ears? Head things? His things he's got on his head? Things like that, just sort of separating them. Just using a couple of dark tones, using a couple of light tones. Very simple at the moment. It's always good to, I think it's always good to start simple and just build it up as you go. And then once Toothless was at a point where you could at least see the different shapes of him, I knew I had to get the background down, and I knew that it was going to absolutely suck. So I thought I'll get it done now. So the first thing I did was started to add some textures. I have my airbrush and I just use different textures that I have imported into Paint Tool Sci. I would leave links to the texture packs, but they're all so old, I've had them for so long that I don't remember where I got them from. But yeah, I just sort of generally went over and gave everything a bit of a texture. But it wasn't really looking great, so I went more into my watercolour brush and actually manually doing stuff. I did my best to follow the reference and just make it a bit more realistic, but like I said, this really isn't my strong point. I ended up completely undoing the whole cliff and just restarting it. I added a few overlay layers to just give it the sort of colour of the lighting. That would help me sort of determine the shades that I wanted to use and how it would look under the colour of the lighting that I'd chosen, which was a bit of a orangey yellowy light. And then I just kind of went for it. I just realised that I needed to not think about it almost, because if I was thinking about it, then I was thinking about it too hard. I was overdoing it. I just had to think that you know how to shade, you know how to draw. You could do all these shapes and stuff on a character, why can't you do it on a background? So I just sort of went with the flow, really. I must admit though, I had no chance of doing the plants and the grass manually. It was going to look absolutely awful if I even tried. So I made use of my scatter brush here. I had some plant textures and basically it just has an image texture and it just scatters it on your canvas, it puts it down. And you end up with this really organic feel to it. Because like I was saying earlier, nature is quite random. It doesn't really have these solid set in stone patterns that industrial landscapes have. I mean, of course there are patterns, like say on trees, you've got the rings and stuff. So there are patterns in nature. It's not got that man-made feel. It's a lot looser, it's a lot more random, and the scatter brush really helps with that when it comes to vegetation. Some people may see this cheating, but I just see it as using all the tools I have available for efficiency's sake and my convenience. Knowing how to use your tools is what makes you good at your craft. And in digital art, that's knowing how to use your brushes and use the different textures and their quirks and stuff to your advantage. And so, like I said here, I'm using the scatter brush to my advantage so that I don't have to draw every single individual leaf myself. Now, I was absolutely hating the background at this point, but I sent it to a few friends and other servers and they said it looked fine. So I decided to just stop for the day and come back to it the next day. And yeah, I still didn't really like it, but I didn't hate it as much. So I guess that kind of worked, having sort of stepped away for a bit and come back. Anyways, we're on to properly painting in Toothless now. This is where the detail is going to start coming in. So first I started off making sure the different shapes were really refined, that they were really visible and you could really tell them apart, that it didn't look flat and that you could see the 3D-ness of it. Like I said earlier, it was basically just slowly building up the different shades and stuff, as well as thinking about how the shapes would affect the shadows and lighting. Light isn't just this one solid thing. It bends, it refracts, it changes. You may think, oh, so the light is hitting that part of the character, therefore that part is highlighted, and this part is the shadow. But you also got to think about where the light source is in comparison to the character in terms of a 3D space, not just a 2D plane. So for example, the sun is, yeah, it's up there, but it's also behind, it's further back, which will probably cause a bit of a backlight as well. And that's basically where, yeah, there's a highlight and there's a shadow on the bottom, but there's also a bit of a rim light in the bit that was shadowed, because the light is obviously hitting from behind. It is sort of slightly curving around that area. Does that make sense? I don't know. I'm really bad at explaining things. But yeah, basically what I'm saying is that studying light is really important with art, and if you want to improve, I think it's a really good place to look at. I actually sort of based his torso on what my leopard gecko looks like. Yeah, if you didn't know, I have a leopard gecko. So you've got the pectoral muscles that go into the arms, and you've got this sort of slight cave in going down the middle, and the two sets of muscles on either side that sort of come out a bit more. That's what I based it on. And then obviously gave him a little bit of a collarbone as well, because boy has a long neck. I did try to put a sort of general scale texture over the top, but it looked absolutely awful, so I got rid of it. I always really like doing eyes. I find them really fun. I'll give you a tip on how to make eyes look good really easily. Basically what I do is I keep lighter tones on the top and darker tones on the bottom, making sure to use slightly different hues to mix it up. So for these green eyes, there's some yellow in there as well. If it was blue eyes, I'd probably put a mixture of dark blue and light blue, maybe a little bit of teal, maybe towards a little bit of purple, depending on what I'm going for. I then get a darker shade of the matching colour and I outline the eyes. I then get a lighter colour and just sort of scribble in these little lines. And then towards the centre, I'll just build that up and do a little sort of light ring around the pupil. And there you go, really easy eyes. The raised scales, I basically just made sure they look 3D. It seems difficult, it was more just tedious. Basically just sort of putting light a bit where the light is touching and having a sort of darker edge around the bit where the light wouldn't be touching, just to get this idea then being a little bit raised up. Now, I ditched the idea of the scale texture over the top of it all, but I had an idea of manually adding in these little scales myself, and basically having it so they're only visible on parts where the light is really hitting and really shining on there, and that these are just scales that are really reflecting that light and therefore they're more visible. Saves me having to do it over the whole piece, and it just gives a bit more depth to the shading. Now, this next bit is for those of you who tell me to pick up a pen and make some real art. Anyways, it took a while to do all these little scales, but I think it added a lot to the piece. Once it's all mapped out, I went onto my usual style of shading, which is using overlay layers. Of course, I didn't have a sort of line art and base layer to work on here, so clipping masks weren't really going to do it, so basically I just used the selection tool and just selected everything so that, well, it would stay in that area. Incredibly basic shading at this point, just to add a bit more of light into it. I then went on and did the rest of the shading for Toothless, which was the more refined shading, adding harsher lines for shadows and highlights for the parts that are really dark and really light. And with this liner style, it definitely helped to separate areas a bit more and make shapes a bit more visible. I used a multiply layer for the shadows just so it pops on every single type of colour, and an overlay layer for the highlights. And both layers obviously turning opacity down a bit, and I did a little bit of a blow on them just to soften them up a tiny bit. Because like I said, this is more realistic, this isn't cartoony, so we don't have those really harsh, sharp lines. So while I needed it to be sort of harder lines than the rest of the shading, I didn't want it to be a absolute hard, sharp line. Just give it that little bit of a soft focus. I did much the same sort of style of shading for the background, so overlay layers and multiply layers and highlights and shadows, and it's all the same really. I'd already sort of done the base shading really. There wasn't much sort of basic shading of just blurring that I needed to do. This was all the refined stuff that was going to be the more visible areas that are in the soft focus like on Toothless, and I'm really glad I decided to go back and shade the background like this because it added so much more depth to it. Once everything was shaded, I exported everything and re-imported them on separate layers. This was so I could start thinking about the focal point. So the rocks and bushes in the foreground, well, they're in the foreground, they're going to be in a soft focus. Obviously you've got Toothless, the ground, the grass and all those rocks in the middle. They're going to be the focal point, they're going to be the point that is sharp and crisp. And the cliff in the back is going to be slightly more soft focus. And then the trees further back will be more soft focus, and then even further back more soft focus until it's quite blurred. Just giving the idea of a 3D environment where, say, the camera that's taking the photo is focused on Toothless in the middle and the rest of it has blurred because the lens isn't focused on those parts. And then it was the final effects and lighting. This really just brings it all together. Added some sun rays as well as some little dots in the air that are almost like pollen floating around. And then with some final finishing touches, such as roughing up the surface of the rocks because they looked a bit too unnaturally smooth to me. I just made it so that the moss was a bit more 3D on it. It was all done after that. And there you have it, the Toothless dancing meme with the RTX on. I am not 100% happy with how it turned out. Like I said, I went for a style that I'm not very comfortable with. I don't do very often, that being the more lineless painted style. But I want to know what you guys think about it. Do you think it looks alright? Do you like it? What do you think could be improved on it? Also let me know down below what you'd like to see for a video. Are there more memes you'd like me to redraw in a more realistic style? Anyways guys, thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, maybe subscribe and leave a like, I'd really appreciate it. Turn on notifications to know when I upload next. I try to upload weekly, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!